Greetings, one and all. Yes, it's indeed a pleasure to be here to discuss the topic of medical cannabis, and I hope I provide you with some insights into what medical cannabis is, how it's grown within the regional tropical climate, and how we tend to look at more the regional approach to understanding cannabis business. Sorry, yes, I have a little difficulties here. Oh, yeah. Oh. Yes, it's on. All right, thank you very much once again. So the Caribbean region has had a long malleable relationship with the cannabis plant, coming from the colonization days when industrial hemp was actually brought here in terms of the Europeans to repair the ships and ropes for sailing, to have the strongest tree fiber in the entire plant kingdom. But moving on, we have seen heavy eradication sponsored by first world governments. We have seen the birth of Rastafari, where you use cannabis as a sacrament, and we have seen where today we are on the verge of developing a regional cannabis economy. So I guess in terms of my presentation today is going to look at what medical cannabis is and how it's grown within the region, tropical climate, and look at more the regional demographics. So medical cannabis refers to the use of cannabis and the cannabinoids constituents, typically THC and CBD, as a therapeutic use for alleviating symptoms. And medical preparations trace back from 500 years, no, 5,000 years. As we know, humans do form an intrinsic relationship with the cannabis plant, serving from its being very diverse, meaning cannabis can be used for structural components, nutritional, medicinal, and a wide myriad of different values. So the herbal, which is the oldest known pharmacopoeia, which cannabis was mentioned in the Chinese literature. So medically, cannabis has moved from being a simple remedial plant to a plant that has significant contributions towards modern medicine, especially where medicine has the antibiotic crisis. Oh boy, my apologies. So the cannabis plant produces more than 500 natural compounds in the form of cannabinoids, which are known to be the psychoactive components, terpenoids, which are the flavoral compounds, and we have flavonoids. So there are three types of various cannabinoids. We have the endocannabinoids, which is what the human the human body produces endogenously. And we have phytocannabinoids, which is produced by the cannabis plant. And we have synthetic cannabinoids, which are man-made cannabinoids in the form of typical THC and CBD. So a tetrahydrogen cannabinol, this is responsible for the psychoactive component, and it gives the euphoria, and this can be used to treat a wide range of things such as nausea, vomiting, which is known from chemotherapy, stimulating one's appetite, and also decreasing intestinal motility. But THC does have negative implications, meaning that cultivars of high THC are known to cause anxiety, paranoia, and disorientation. So the non-psychoactive component, cannabidiol, which is known to treat stuff like seizures, anxiety disorders, and then we have the terpenoids, which are very critical because these are the flavoral compounds that provide that therapeutic value. And you and I know drinking mint tea is not the same as drinking ginger tea. There is a different therapeutic value to these flavors. So, and there are secondary cannabinoids, which those are not pretty well studied, but research definitely shows that the interconnectedness between all these various compounds do provide the cannabis user with a more holistic approach to healing. And these compounds are known to be found in the female flowers. And the female flower, which is a more composite flower, which is known as the inflorescences. So a few secondary cannabinoids that are being studied presently in the form of CBG, which is known to increase insulin. CBC, we have CBN, which is an isomeric form of THC, which like indication on storage quality, age, and so forth. You have CBE, you have CBT, and CBL. So within cannabis, all these various compounds interact to actually give the entourage feeling, which describes the interaction between the major cannabinoids, the terpenoids, and the flavonoids. And the cannabis plant is very diverse, meaning that these compounds exist in various ratios and in concentrations. So then that said, it actually depends on what you want to treat, to what type of variety you would prefer using. And within the cannabis world, you have indica, and you have the subspecies sativa. And this has, based on growing within temperate and tropical climates, both pros and cons. So the human body has an endocannabinoid system, meaning that we have learned about the circulatory system, the pulmonary system, the nervous system, but the human body has an endocannabinoid. The human body has an endocannabinoid system which is pretty much designed to maintain that homeostasis throughout the human biome. And if you look at it, is brought about through a broad range of physiological and pathophysiological processes from neural development, immune function, inflammation, appetite, metabolism, homeostasis, cardiovascular function, digestion, bone development, synaptic plasticity, learning, pain, reproduction, psychiatric disease, psychomotor behavior, memory, wake and sleep cycles, and also regulating stress within the human. So now pretty much that connotation called medical cannabis has the capability to really enhance someone's quality of life, meaning that we always say you can't buy happiness, but you can buy cannabis, which can make you happy, you know? So within the human biome, you have cannabinoid receptors distributed throughout the humans. So CBD1 receptors are pretty much found throughout the nervous system. And you have CBD2, which is pretty much known to have immune capabilities. So depending on how you want to treat would depend on what metabolic pathway, meaning that if you inhale cannabis, which we are not promoting smoking, because of combustion produces many carcinogenic compounds. And so there are modern ways to actually consume cannabis from vaporizing, transdermal patches, capsules. So inhaling cannabis, you have a faster onset. This is done through the lungs. So ingesting cannabis now takes much longer, but the euphoria lasts much longer, which is through the liver. So how we administer cannabis based on what is it we are aiming to treat is very critical to see how is it the human body digests through different metabolic pathways. So cultivating cannabis throughout the tropical space within the Caribbean region. This is very critical because cannabis is not native to the tropical region. It is native to the Asian continent. So growing cannabis within the tropical space takes a very different approach to maintaining quality and good ethical and moral values. So cannabis could be cultivated for three things: for the seed, which is known for good nutrition, fatty acids, for fiber, which is the strongest fiber in the plant world, and the inflorescence, which we will focus more today, because that is what has the medical and therapeutic value, which is the female flowers. So the cannabis plant is typically dioecious, meaning you have male and female plants being born separately. But it does sometimes be monoecious, meaning you have the male and female characteristics being found on a single plant in the form of hermaphrodites. And they are very different hermaphrodites. So the botanical name is Cannabis sativa. The genus Cannabis, the species sativa, and they are subspecies Indica sativa ruderalis. The botanical family Cannabaceae, which has 170 species. The known species Humulus, which is known to be hops, which is used for making of beer. So the pharmacopoeia definition defines cannabis as the dried flowers from the female plant that has a high concentration of the glands trichomes. And these glands are what have the therapeutic and medical value. So there is a wide range of names, meaning cannabis, ganja, marijuana, weed, pot, just to name a few. So within sativa, these are more tropical plants that are tall branch plants. Internodes tend to be much longer with a very narrow leaves, but airy buds. So these plants were mainly used for fiber seeds and psychoactive properties. So these plants typically have a 1-to-1 ratio based on CBD versus THC. And if you understand CBD being the non-psychoactive component and THC being the psychoactive component, it really works as a yin versus yin versus yang. Sorry about that. So based on sativa plants develop more within the subtropical region. So within 30 degrees latitude, and these plants tend to provide the user with a more uplifting, energetic euphoria. On the other hand, indica plants, which is a more temperate plant, where the branches tend to be much shorter, broader leaves, tighter buds, and tend to have higher concentrations of the CBD, but like very low concentrations. No, higher concentrations THC, but very low concentrations CBD. And these would develop within more temperate regions. And it gives a more relaxing, sedative feeling. And ruderalis, which is a temperate wild-type plant that does not really produce cannabinoids, but is used within modern-day breeding to actually bring about the autoflowering characteristics, meaning that the plant is not sensitive towards diurnal periods. And within modern-day cannabis, whereas cannabis has pretty much colonized the globe, we have hybrids, which are cross-pollinated. As you know, cannabis is a wind-pollinated plant. So based on that, breeders have bred indicas within sativas and produce hybrids. And these hybrids tend to give the best of both worlds. However, some of them may lean towards indica characteristics versus sativa. So within this modern day expressions. Cannabis is really diverse based on the ratios of cannabinoids versus terpenoids to actually give you that unique euphoria based on a single plant. So the word strain really means the capability to replicate a consistent phytochemical profile consistently. So one of the differences between the recreational user versus the medical user is a medical user wants to be able to anticipate that euphoria every single time. So by growing that plant within certain conditions, we can replicate these phytochemical profiles consistently. And this is pretty much done through asexual propagation. Sexual propagation means that growing from seeds, and each seed is going to give you different genetic expression. So you won't be able to anticipate the exact euphoria. So the human resource capabilities to grow these plants for medical purposes takes a different protocol. So how do we maintain quality throughout a tropical cultivation? First of all, development of standards and regulations to maintain safety, replicability, efficacy, consistency is very paramount. So cannabis consumers, may it be medical, sacramental, need to ensure that within the regulatory framework, they are consuming something which is safe. So cultivators do need to differentiate between quality and level of the contaminants. So post-harvest storage needs to be standardized, optimized to maintain these quality throughout production. So areas that dispense cannabis now must understand the needs of the consumers and how they can use it to benefit their own lifestyles. So testing for pesticides, which is a huge concern, because a pesticide residue, when actually heated to high temperatures, could really replicate very toxic compounds like a cyanide, and is known to be very poisonous and cause chronic brain disorders. So levels of quantification throughout our production on the dried flowers, extracts, concentrates needs to be tested for. So a student of mine looked at some work, and she said the phytophagous insects that patronize cannabis throughout production, she actually came up with 27 different families, meaning they may not be pests. Some of them may be beneficial. Some of them may be just patronizing the plant as a home. However, growing the plant within the temperate space where you have 4 different seasons, this is very different, being the tropical climate being pretty much stable. The same pest that we would have here would be very different within the temperate space, and to the persistence of the pesticides would be very different. So there needs to be more research within this field to understand approved list and what sort of applications throughout production we can use. Microbial testing, the exposure to these toxins to pose serious challenges, and this is pretty much strain dependent, meaning that the indica, being more temperate plants, seem to be more susceptible to these mold, meaning that the sativa plants, which are more tropically grown, would tend to dry out faster throughout the morning period. But the indica type nugs tend to proliferate fungal spores and mycelium. So no one wants to be inhaling these fungal mycelium, which could be very detrimental towards your health. So how we maintain that quality throughout production to maximize the therapeutic and medical value throughout cultivation is a plant, and the sector demands raw material being king. So without the raw material, you pretty much don't have a good sound consumer can patronize. Oh boy. Potency testing. So cannabinoid ratios. So typically within the cannabis world, you have high THC, very low CBD. You have 1 ratio, and you have high CBD and low THC. However, modern day cultivars have bred down CBD and bred up THC, making the plant more psychoactive. However, the land-raised cultivars that we have had here traditionally from the 1960s, 70s would have tended to have more one-to-one ratios. So at the presence of stuff, so what I'm saying here is this was a sample tested by the university lab that showed 36% THC. And with that said, a typical landrace plant from the 1960s, 70s would have no more than 10 to 13% THC. So this does pose challenges, especially for the youth, because someone who wants to experience cannabis for the very first time, using something that has 36% THC versus something that has 10% THC could be very detrimental to that person consuming it. So a combination of these compounds, terpenoids, cannabinoids, would give a very unique euphoria for that cultivar. So sharing some of my work, we know that during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, Jamaica, St. Vincent are known to be the producer countries, and they have developed international reputation. So this was pretty much done by the presence of landrace cultivars that have acclimatized within the Caribbean biogeography, meaning that the indentured laborers who brought the seeds here were these plants were more selected for and more grown. And a colleague of mine makes the reference that you could see the difference between the music, meaning that you have the Bob Marleys, the Peter Tosh, reggae music, and then in the 1980s, 1990s, you have all this dancehall music. So it shows you now that what actually happened during the 1980s, eradication efforts were very persuasive, meaning that the United States government sponsored helicopters to visit the Caribbean region to spray herbicides. and these really depleted our germplasm stock. So in early 1990s, saw the introduction of more indica-type cultivars, meaning those strains are more acclimatized to grow within the temperate space. So what actually happened is the landrace plants, sativa plants, which tend to give more uplifting feelings. These plants would like take between sometimes 9 months to reach maturity. As you can see, much taller plants, and these plants, as I said previously, would have a typically 6% CBD and somewhere between 10 and 13% THC. So for a cannabis farmer now who feels that based on growing these temperate plants, there was an advantage to him, because within the temperate space, these plants need 18 hours of light to vegetate during the long summer period. So growing temperate varieties within the Caribbean, these plants would actually stay pretty short, right? Meaning that you would get from seed to bud within 8 to 10 weeks. So, and these plants are known to be higher yielding plants and have higher psychoactive capabilities. And this is pretty much what we see today, because the level of hybridization that has taken place, most of the cultivars that we have today within Jamaica's demographics would lean more towards these temperate plants. And these plants tend to be more susceptible based on disease and pests. So planting cannabis within the tropical space, our photo period is basically stable. So it fluctuates slightly between Christmas, summertime, but it does not implicate the vegetative cycle, meaning the plant putting on biomass. So the difference is not sufficient to have commercial viability throughout production, for like the grower to get projected yields. So what is done within a tropical climate is extending the day, meaning that you use lights within the greenhouse to extend the day to trick the plant that you have a much longer photo period. So due to that now, the Caribbean advantage pretty much is the fact that we have the tropical space. So the flowering cycle of the plant requires 12 hours light. So this means we can flower cannabis plants throughout the tropical world 365 days per year. So if you have 52 weeks per year, you could flower, you could harvest about 9-10 times per year, whereas within the temperate space, you only have that advantage once a year. So the capability of producing more cannabis with connotations like sun grown, and we know the consumer preference within the last 20 to 15 years has changed, meaning that the consumer is willing to patronize products based on ethical and moral values. So we have that tropical sun and natural connotation to market a Caribbean cannabis. No. So I did some work previously comparing the vegetative growth, which is the most critical stage throughout production, because this is where the plant puts on biomass. So you could see that the study was done looking at 3 different cultivars, meaning the sativa landrace, indica, and a hybridized plant. And the landrace plant used here was actually from Dominica. The reason why, because Dominica being the only Caribbean country presently that does not have an international runway, meaning that the influence of foreign genetics coming there would be very minimal. So the ability to find the landrace plant within places like Dominica would be more feasible. So you could see that the sativa landrace plant, which has the smallest leaf area index, versus the indica plant being the more temperate plant. So this says that a plant that has the wider leaves, indica plant, would have the capability to trap a lot more sunlight, which would translate to more photosynthesis, meaning that the plant should be able to grow faster. However, this is different because we see that at the average height from week 4 to week 6, there is a significant difference based on how the landrace grows. And you could see, based on the average number of leaflets, there is a significant differences throughout the landrace plant, and the same for the number of branches. So this pretty much shows you that there is economic implications to what sort of cultivars that we grow here, meaning that you could put the same energy input within certain cultivars, but you would get greater results from like growing the more tropical varieties. And within that said, based on the phytochemical profile within these landrace plants, we have seen where these plants produce very unique phytochemical profiles, meaning that they are actually terpenoids that I have looked at that I have not seen standards to actually conclusively determine what type of terpenoids there. So really, within the nostalgia value of growing cannabis within the Caribbean, growing the land races and doing the research to understand what type of medical value that these land races would have would be important to how the Caribbean will fit within the global cannabis world. So harvesting, so everything that we grow cannabis for is pretty much this like gland here, the trichome, which is seen here. So this gland is what has a medical and therapeutic value. So everything you do post-harvest is to maintain the integrity of these glands. And meaning that the plant being more of a temperate plant, these trichomes need to be maintained within a sort of semi-frozen state. So by doing so, how in terms of harvesting and knowing when these trichomes reach maximum saturation points based on cannabinoids, terpenoids, flavonoids. So in terms of monitoring the plant, these trichomes move like from like being transparent to translucent to more opaque, milky. And when it's milky, it's at maximum saturation point. So how we maintain based on temperature, humidity, those factors need to be controlled. And by harvesting the plant based on traditional means, the oxidation that takes place converts the original THC structure to more CBN, and CBN is known to give a more narcotic, lazy euphoria versus the original healing properties from like THC, CBD. And it's well known that light breaks down chlorophyll. So to maintain good quality value throughout production, we need to have control post-harvest, which definitely takes plenty energy consumption to actually maintain that. So looking into the region, the global business of cannabis is currently valued at 400 billion US dollars, which is big money business. So you have pharmaceutical companies who are voyaging to increase viability and long-term sustainability throughout cannabis. And we see where the United States being federally not legal, but you have where more than 50 states, so more than 50% of the United States population has access to medical cannabis. And many more states will be doing so shortly. Canada has had a medical program since 2001, and they made recreational use legal last year. So presently you have 16 countries globally that has medical cannabis programs, and Europe accounts for most of that market share with 140 million cannabis users. So CARICOM in 2014 established the regional commission. And coming out from that, there was a need to go beyond the scope of medical cannabis, but to embrace social justice, human rights, economy, regional hegemony, and access to like healthcare, meaning that cannabis has known to provide the medical user with much less side effects as modern day medicine. And within the aging population, we see where CBD is very critical in understanding dementia-related conditions, stuff like Parkinson's, so forth. So several countries within the region have made legislative amendments to their laws to facilitate medical cannabis, Jamaica being the first, and followed by Belize, Antigua, St. Vincent, and recently St. Kitts, Nevis. So just on the topic of St. Kitts, recently within the news, you see where a Coca-Cola billionaire was actually bringing hemp to the region, and this could have implications based on our nostalgia, value, and marketing and integration within the global space, because cultivating hemp cultivating hemp and the fact that the plant is wind pollinated, and research shows there's a 30% molecular difference between the genome from industrial hemp versus cannabis grown for its psychoactive component, cannabinoids. So at the level of cross-pollination that can take place could really deplete that integrity of cultivating particularly type cultivars. And the fact that we are within the hurricane belt, think of it, if a tropical storm blows, we also get pollen that actually, well, Sahara dust from the continent. So at the level of cross-pollination that can take place, we need to be careful. So economic growth within the Caribbean region was forecasted to reach 0.9% in 2017 and 2% last year, and is projected to reach 2.9, which is so Caribbean countries focus mainly on stuff like tourism, services, production of minerals, agricultural commodities. But the Caribbean region has not been new to partaking within the agricultural value chain. So this is not reinventing the wheel, but at the Caribbean, how we understand cannabis now is a new dimension based on the fact that the plant is so diverse, but also brings about very wide range of healing connotations. So within many Caribbean countries, agriculture is still one of the largest contributors to GDP, and actually hires plenty people. So within the Caribbean region, the biogeography and socio-economic strata is different. So we always say that we need to understand the strengths and weaknesses, meaning that Belize, Guyana being mainland, and know a history of producing stuff like sugarcane and rice on a very large scale. They could be more privy to like growing hemp, whereas Jamaica, St. Vincent could grow the more psychoactive component flowers, and we do have that indigenous knowledge to actually enhance that. Whereas Trinidad, being the more production, manufacturing hub with low energy consumption, they could focus more on manufacturing. So within Jamaica, you see the processing labs setting up, but the fire brigade does not have the level of competence to deal with extractions of high butane, CO2, so forth. So those things are actually posing challenges. So a Caribbean intra-regional trade within the region has been the lowest over the past 20 years. So cannabis now, so how we set the legislative framework is a very complex one to understand the interconnectedness of trade patterns within the region and the globe. So the illegal trade has posed serious challenges based on the farmer consumer benefits less, and the middleman now who has less quality management systems gets paid the highest, and this is where the problems within the trade are that actually causes violence and so forth. So the data within the windward space shows that from data recorded from the police force has definitely shown us that cannabis contributes more to the domestic economy than bananas did. So Barbados, now being the country within the Caribbean that definitely has the highest consumption rate per capita, which actually translates to the highest domestic value, meaning that cannabis fetches the highest price locally here, higher than prices globally. Yeah, so developing the right legislative framework to encapsulate that domestic consumption, which could grow the GDP, but by understanding your local population needs. So Barbados now is very unique too, because we can understand the cross linkages across the various sectors, from agriculture to health to wellness, tourism, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, will ensure that the sustainability can be maximized and really get the true earning potential from cannabis as a commodity. And cannabis traded within the region is definitely the most valuable horticultural commodity with the highest value within its raw state. So, concluding, how will regional governments strategize, develop, integrate formal cannabis economies surrounding the cultivation, processing, transportation, distribution? But there needs to be an integrated approach to developing domestic cannabis economies within the region by setting the policy and legal framework, by understanding by looking at the historical and cultural experiences, the business, marketing, the science, medical. So there needs to be an interdisciplinary approach to understanding cannabis business within the region. And so the public sector, private sectors, universities, all need to coordinate to facilitate the research, the funding, to provide greater understanding between the backward, forward, and cross linkages within the cannabis value chain to maximize the true earning potential and a competitive nature that the region could really bring towards the global cannabis sector. Thank you very much.